Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you all in this state level webinar conducted by the Department of English, Shibpur Dinobundhoo Institution College, in association with Internal Quality Assurance Cell, Shibpur Dinobundhoo Institution College. I welcome our Honorable President of the governing body of this college, Sri Brajamohan Majumdar. I welcome Honorable Member of the Governing Body, Dr. Prithvish Kumar Roy. I also welcome the convener of this webinar, Dr. Anandarup Biswas, Department of English, Dr. Osmita Boral, Head of the Department of English of this college, and of course, our distinguished speaker, Dr. Anjan Dasgupta. I also welcome the viewers, the distinguished viewers in the YouTube channel, the students and all. We are supposed to hear the inaugural address of the Honorable President of the governing body, but due to some unavoidable reason, he could not join in this webinar, but he is kind enough to send an audio clip. So now we will hear the inaugural address of Sri Brajamohan Majumdar.
সুস্বাগতম মাননীয় অতিথি বক্তা অধ্যাপক বৃন্দকে অভিনন্দন। অভিনন্দন শিবপুর দীনবন্ধু কলেজের উপস্থিত অধ্যাপক বৃন্দ। সুস্বাগতম মাননীয় অতিথি বক্তা অধ্যাপক বৃন্দকে অভিনন্দন। অভিনন্দন শিবপুর দীনবন্ধু কলেজের উপস্থিত অধ্যাপক বৃন্দকে। আজকে 21শে জুলাই থেকে এই কলেজ আয়োজিত ভার্চুয়াল সেমিনারের তৃতীয় পর্যায় 24শে, 27শে, 31শে এই সেমিনার চলবে। করোনা আবহে লকডাউনে আমরা পাঠ্যভবন বন্ধ করতে বাধ্য হয়েছি, কিন্তু পাঠন বন্ধ করিনি, বিশেষ করে পরোক্ষ পাঠন বন্ধ করিনি। আমফানে ওঠা ঝঞ্ঝা, বিধ্বস্ত হয়েছে ভবন, কিন্তু সেমিনার বন্ধ হয়নি। আমরা ইতিমধ্যেই আমাদের কৃত্য নিয়ে প্রথম পর্যায়ে আলোচনা করেছি। দ্বিতীয় পর্যায়ে 21শে জুলাই কলেজের উদ্ভিদ বিদ্যা বিষয়ক বিভাগ পরবর্তী প্রজন্মের নাগরিক ও বৃক্ষরোপণ উৎসব বিষয়ক আলোচনায় এই সেমিনার আয়োজন করেছি। বৃক্ষ বন্দনার অন্যতম মন্ত্র, যা কবিগুরুর কবিতায় উল্লেখিত হয়েছে, তা উচ্চারিত হবে। তব প্রাণে প্রাণবান, তব স্নেহচ্ছায়ার শীতল, তব তেজে তেজিয়ান, এসো মানবের বন্ধু। ইটের পরে ইট, মাঝে মানুষ কীটের শ্বাসকষ্ট দূর করো, নাগরিক এর বৃন্দকে সবুজের আহ্বানে নতুন করে স্নাত করো। আলোচনায় অংশ নেবেন ডক্টর অরিজিৎ সরকার, ডক্টর তানিয়া ঘটক চক্রবর্তী প্রমুখ ব্যক্তিগণ। এরপর 24শে জুলাই এই কলেজের বাংলা বিভাগ কর্তৃক আরেকটি সেমিনার আয়োজিত হবে। প্রখ্যাত সাহিত্যিক, সাংবাদিক, সম্পাদক প্রয়াত সন্তোষ কুমার ঘোষের শতবর্ষ পূর্তিতে তার কৃতির মূল্যায়ন হবে এই সেমিনারে। পৃথিবী কবিতা নিয়েই তার কাব্যচর্চা শুরু। দিনগোয়ালার গলির মতো উপন্যাস ও অসংখ্য আমাদের অজাতক, অপার্থিব নামক অসংখ্য ছোট গল্প এবং প্রবন্ধ তার অমর কীর্তি। শতবর্ষ পরও তার লিখিকাখানি কৌতূহল ভরে পাঠ ও আলোচনা করবেন তারই সুযোগ্যা কন্যা কাকুলি চক্রবর্তী, ডক্টর কৃষ্ণরূপ চক্রবর্তী, কৃষ্ণে বানু প্রমুখ অধ্যাপক বৃন্দ। 27শে জুলাই আমরা আরেকটি সেমিনারের আয়োজন করেছি। এই কলেজের ইতিহাস বিভাগ, ইংরেজি বিভাগে উদ্যোক্তারা এই সেমিনারের আয়োজন করেছি। ক্যারল এর ওয়ার্ক সম্বন্ধে আলোচনা হবে কেন্দ্রীয় বিষয়বস্তু। 19শ শতাব্দীর শেষ দশক পর্যন্ত ব্রিটেনে যার সাহিত্যের আকাধিপত্য ছিল, হাউসিং অফ স্টার্স, অ্যালিসেস অ্যাডভেঞ্চার, অলোক, যুবা, বৃদ্ধদের আপামর মানুষকে মুগ্ধ করেছে। সেই সাহিত্যিক মনোযোগ্য, এই সাহিত্য মনীষী আদর্শ নীতি নিয়ে আলোচনা করবেন ডক্টর অঞ্জন দাশগুপ্ত, ডক্টর আনন্দমোহন বিশ্বাস প্রমুখ অধ্যাপক বৃন্দ। 31শে জুলাই কলেজের হিন্দি বিভাগের উদ্যোগে প্রেমচাঁদ মুন্সি বিষয়ক আলোচনা। এদিনই বোধ করি তার আবির্ভাব দিবস। শরৎচন্দ্র চট্টোপাধ্যায়ের সমসাময়িক ও স্বগোত্রীয় একজন সাহিত্যিক রূপে ভারতবর্ষের বুকে তিনি অমর সাক্ষ্য রেখে গেছেন। কোরআন, প্রেমাশ্রম তার রচনা এবং তার বিখ্যাত রচনা সদ্গতি ও সদরঞ্জিত খিলাড়ি অমর চিত্ররূপ আজও আমাদের কাছে উজ্জ্বল হয়ে রয়েছে। সারা ভারতে কোন সাহিত্যিক রূপেই তার খ্যাতির বিভূতি। তার রচনার অসংখ্য নিয়ে আলোচনা করবেন ডক্টর সত্যপ্রকাশ তেওয়ারি, কলকাতা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের রাজর্ষি শুক্লা উপাধ্যায়, আসামের শীতাংশু প্রধান এবং অবশ্যই আমাদের নতুন ভাবে আমাদের মনে এই আলোচনার এই ধরিয়ে দেবেন আমাদের নেপাল বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের অধ্যাপক সেটা দীপ্তি। তাকে আমরা আগাম অভিনন্দন জানিয়ে রাখছি। আমরা এই লকডাউন শিয়রের দুটো জানলা দিয়ে ভার্চুয়াল মিটিং এ জীবন ও জীবিকার সন্ধানে প্রবৃত্ত হয়েছি। প্রথাগত ঘণ্টাচালিত মিটিং এর পাঠ নয়, পরোক্ষ জীবন রসহৃদ্য সাহিত্য এবং প্রকৃতির মধ্যেই আমরা সত্যিকারে জীবন রস আহরণ করব। এই সেমিনারে বিভিন্ন পর্যায়ে অংশগ্রহণ করেছেন এই কলেজের অধ্যক্ষ ডক্টর মণিদীপ চন্দ্র, অধ্যাপক নেতা, কলেজের পরিচালক মন্ডলীর সদস্য এবং ডক্টর কার্তিক চন্দ্র কাটুয়া, আমাদের সন্দীপন নায়ক প্রমুখ যারা এসেছেন বা আছেন, তাদের ধন্যবাদ।
We are listening to the inaugural speech of the Honorable President of the governing body. Now, let me introduce before you the theme of the topic, that is the real, the unreal, and the fantastic, a study of Carroll's Through the Looking Glass as popular children's literature. Now, the thing is like that. As a matter of fact, real is sometimes more fantastic than unreal. As a matter of fact, real and unreal is not separated from each other. Rather, there is an interface between the two. If we go to the synonyms for real, we have, that is the actual, true, genuine, tangible, sincere, and more of this. If we go for the synonym over unreal, we find that imaginary, fanciful, illusory, fantastic, false. So there is a difference between the real and unreal, but still our very existence is based on a conscious interaction between the realistic and the imaginary, realistic and the imaginary world. So, as a matter of fact, the question remains. As a matter of fact, the question remains that why does the marvelous, the wonderful, and the fantastic seem to be the natural territory of childhood? There are many plausible explanations about this, but most of these are not scientifically true. There is no evidence that fantasy is therapeutic, or the children use fantastic literature to work out their problems or as an escape. As a matter of fact, even the very youngest children already are perfectly able to discriminate between the imaginary and the real, whether in books or movies or in their own pretended play. So cognitive science suggests that children may love fantasy not because they cannot appreciate the truth or because their lives are difficult, but for precisely the opposite reason. A theory in science or in everyday life doesn't just describe one particular way the world happens to be at the moment. Instead, having a theory tells you about the ways the world could have been in the past or might be in the future. So there is a similarity between the fantasy and the theory. What is fantasy today is become a theory tomorrow and become a reality in the next days. That is why theories are so profoundly powerful and adaptive. A theory not only explains the world we see, it lets us imagine other worlds, and even more significantly, let us act to create those worlds. So the thing is like that. We are here to hear about the various dimensions of the looking through the glass. And so, best of luck, Alice, for your extended adventure through the looking glass in this webinar. And don't forget to attend the ex post analysis by none other than Professor Anjan Dasgupta. Thank you. Now, I will request uh, Dr. Anandarup Biswas to say something on this occasion. Dr. Biswas.
Thank you very much, sir. I welcome all the guests, the speaker, the dignitaries who are present here for this virtual session. We are very pleased to organize this seminar, this webinar on Lewis Carroll's Through a Looking Glass, as part of our series of lectures or extended lectures and talks and webinars that we are going to organize in the near future. Before I introduce our speaker, Dr. Anjan Dasgupta, who will make his presentation, may I also request our head of the department to say a few words and then come back to the introduction if possible, and then move on to the speech. If it's okay with the others. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope there aren't too many sound disturbances. I can hear some echo. Good afternoon. I welcome in our midst Dr. Anjan Dasgupta, and I'm looking forward to him helping us learn and unlearn many of the things that we picked up in our childhood regarding children's literature, regarding popular literature, and now which we have to look at in a new way. We have to look at new interpretations. I'm hearing a Carroll lecture. So I am really thankful to everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Ushmita Baral, for that very brief and enlightening note. It is now my very pleasant duty to introduce our speaker for this session, Dr. Anjan Dasgupta. Dr. Anjan Dasgupta, who also happens to be a very good friend of mine, teaches English in Bijoy Narayan Mahavidyalaya, Hooghly. Before he joined that college, he has taught in Gaur Mahavidyalaya for 12 years. He took a research-based course on task-based language teaching during his stint as a Fulbright Fellow at the Johns Hopkins University, the USA, in 2004-05. Anjan has taught in the Department of English, University of Calcutta, as a guest faculty from 2015 to 2019. His research interests include teaching of English as a second language and postmodern studies. His doctoral thesis is titled Interpreting Children's Fantasy as Distortion of Reality, a study in the novels of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Ursula Le Guin, and J.K. Rowling. Uh, Anjan is a very good speaker, and he makes very mundane topics interesting. And I believe that it will be a pleasure to hear you, Anjan. And without any further delay, I would like you to set up your presentation and carry on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Anando. And it is a pleasure to be here today to speak on this issue. Now, first of all, I would like to thank the Honorable Principal, President of the governing body, and all the other respectable people around here. Now, the topic today that I am going to address. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. You are audible. Carry on. Carry on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the college authorities, the honorable principal, the governing body president, and the other members, the head department of English, and of course my very good friend Anand. Now, Anand was very kind in his deliberation when he was talking about me and all that. Now, in today's talk, what I will try to focus on is of course about the real and the unreal in the text that has been prescribed to me. Now, these are very thin margins, as you understand, real and unreal, as Honorable Principal Sir was also telling us. But now I would, of course, differ a little bit with him on some points, as it always transpires. In my presentation, I have tried to focus on the major exponents of fantasy and, of course, the text. My now, first of all, I would like to thank my son very much for this, because he has actually painstakingly done the PowerPoint presentation with the illustrations and all that, without which I would have made a presentation, of course, but maybe a much more blander presentation, or at least the illustrative part. Now, I'll just go directly to the presentation. I would request Anando to, if at any point I'm inaudible, to ping me on WhatsApp or give me a message so that I can understand that I'm not audible. Okay. So I'll just start the presentation now. Going to the first slide. Share the screen. Yes, I think I'm there. The, so this is the first. You see, so one of the most important things about a presentation, a speech, or a lecture is where to begin from and where to end. So when Hatter asked the Queen in Alice in Wonderland, "Where do I begin from and where do I end?" the Queen gave a very simple solution. She said, "Begin from the beginning and go on till the end." Now, these are very easy things to say, of course, but then when you think that where you begin and where you end, I think you are done with it. So these are the two most important things about almost all things in life. Now, when we consider a text, when we consider a paper, a lecture, or anything for that matter in life, these are the two most important things: where to begin from and where to end. So, since we are going to discuss another Lewis Carroll text, I thought it's very befitting to discuss this as a point of sort of starting, a premise to start off. So the problem just begins, as the slide says also. The job of a teacher and a narrator are thankless as it were. So before going into the main thrust of my discussion, I'm tempted to take just one more instance from Alice in Wonderland. "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" asked Alice. "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to," said the Cheshire Cat. So we see this is a very interesting quote which I'm sharing from Alice in Wonderland. You see, where do I go from here? Where do I go from here? So I myself don't know, or most of the listeners don't know where I'm going to end up. You see, so that is a very important thing. Where do you go to? What do you want to do? When a person tries to write a text of fantasy, and of course, fantasy is also very much theoretically conditioned. Uh, Sciences have their theories, literatures also have their theories. So this is a very important premise to start off from. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? So, as a Cheshire Cat suggests, I also would sort of wonder, where do I go from here? What are the premises that I will lead you people to, in that sense? So, any presenter is apprehensive of the outcome from the very beginning, especially when listeners are such avid listeners and when there are such illustrious listeners at that. And another issue, problem is that such invisible listeners. When I will be talking on real and unreal at some length in today's lecture, a very interesting thing that I would like to say at the very beginning. Even 5 months ago, did you ever envisage, did you ever think that we would have such an afternoon sitting over here in our own rooms, the comfort of our rooms, and attending a thing called webinar? Honestly speaking, how many of us were comfortable with the term webinars even even 5 months earlier? I don't think many of us were very comfortable with it. So we don't know. The COVID situation, the corona situation has locked us indoors. And we have no idea how many years we will be, how many months more we will be in this situation. So it was quite unreal, absolutely unreal. For 31st December, I think we saw this news for the first time on television that some virus has broken out in China. And today it's a global reality. We are all indoors. That's the real situation. So, as the principal sir was saying, the boundary line between real and unreal, interface between real and unreal, is quite thin and quite ephemeral in that sense. To suggest, I would be demonstrating that up to quite a length in this. It is difficult actually to. I think I'll do the next slide. In my presentation today, I will try to focus on the real and unreal and demonstrate, as I've already mentioned, how the line between the two is not very remote, and will, in the process, try to arrive at a definition of fantasy and how it operates in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. Look at this very interesting dialogue from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. "Tell me one last thing," said Harry. "Is this real, or has this been happening inside my head?" "Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry. But why on earth should that mean it is not real?" So you see that again, Harry Potter in this very interesting those of you who have read Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows would be able to follow, and even those who have not read would be able to relate the issues of real and unreal. Harry asks his teacher Dumbledore about whether whatever is happening is actually real. And then he makes a very interesting observation that yes, it is real. And he says, why on earth should that mean it is not real? So the boundary between real and unreal is being mentioned in this quotation that I've shared. Harry is trying to inquire of Dumbledore about the real and the unreal. What then is the real? What we see before us? What we perceive? What we do not perceive? What can be perceived and what we may not? As I was saying just minutes ago, that in this corona situation, we actually could not perceive this even a few months back. Work from home, giving lectures from home, taking online classes from home. As Principal Sir was sharing with us a little while ago, that the college has done a very commendable job in taking so many classes and organizing so many webinars. But this was not possible earlier. Earlier, we would have maybe it was more productive. But then again, the, the aura, the pleasure of speaking before a live audience can never be achieved by this. But what we could not perceive a few months ago, we are perceiving now. But that is, of course, not a theory that I'll be arriving at. Uh, this is John Green, the author of The Fault is in Our Stars. Harry Potter isn't real. Oh no, wait. What do you mean by real? Am I real if you can see me and hear me, but only through the internet? Are you real if I can read your comment, but I don't know who you are, or what your name is, or where you are from, or what you look like, or how old you are? I know all of those things about Harry Potter. Maybe Harry Potter is real and you are not. So you see, when we are talking about say we are now having online classes every day. Our children are having online classes every day. I know instances when the child is busy sleeping and it's the mother or the father who is doing the class. So these are of course real classes and sort of or unreal classes. We don't know what they are. So This is a very interesting and very confusing sort of an interface. A very nice word used today by our principals. So we don't know, of course. I don't know who are exactly are in the audience. Who are the people who are actually listening? Is that actually everybody listening, or somebody just plugging off, logging in, and then having a nice yes and nothing? This time of the day is, of course, that time of the day when sleep is better off than maybe listening to such a speech. So we don't know what is real, what is unreal, what we are actually trying to arrive at, and what we are really not trying to arrive at. So, through the looking glass and what Alice found there, also known as through the looking glass, is a sequel to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Let us consider the amazing world of Alice in Through the Looking Glass, and even before that, consider the proposition of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland very briefly. One thing I would like to mention very succinctly is I'm not going to discuss the themes of Alice in Wonderland. I mean, of To the Looking Glass here. What I'll be doing is I'll be focusing on the theme of real and the unreal, and in that context, of course, certain themes would come up. There has been a question which I have received earlier through that, about certain themes, which I will touch upon when I will be doing the discussion towards the end of the paper. This is not a paper, of course; it's just a presentation. Alice, now I'll just go directly to, I mean, without to the text. Alice sits in a warm armchair at home, maybe in an afternoon like this. The dominant tendency is to give some indulgence, drowsily, like watching one's pet kitten, Kitty, in Alice's case. She snatches Kitty up and begins telling her about Looking Glass House, an imaginary world on the other side of the mirror where everything is backward. Alice suddenly finds herself in the mantelpiece and steps through the mirror into Looking Glass House. On the other side of the mirror, Alice discovers a room similar to her own, but with several strange differences. You see, this is the thing, the other world. I will be discussing at great length about the other world in with you today. The other world, or the portal, or the means by which the characters from our world will enter that world. I just before further discussion, I would like to suggest a few things about this other world. Look, in the other world, the rules are dominated by peoples of that world. All of us, I think, are familiar with Harry Potter. Think of Harry Potter. Harry Potter, when he crosses the 9 platform, which I'll try to show in one of the slides, he is in another world which has its own rules and regulations. In the famous Tolkien series, there's a hobbit who says that I saw a man today. Just maybe we said I saw a ghost today, I saw this today, or I saw that today. So when we see that such a thing is mentioned, such a thing is introduced, we realize that we are into a world which is completely bizarre, completely different, and has ground rules of its own. We must accept the rules of that world unless we are, or else we'll be lost somewhere. The point is that look, yes, as our principals have said today, that a child of class, even of 7 or 8 years old, knows that what is real and what is unreal. But then that is the basic point what I would like to show today, that this is a very thin boundary. Uh, Look at this mirror. This is the mirror which actually inspired Carroll, and it remains displayed in Charlton King's Museum, Gloucestershire. It's a very nice thing to watch and to see. This is the mirror which I was talking about, and this is preserved over there. This is the actual mirror. Look, this is the portal which I was talking about, the magical entry into the other world. Remember 9 and 3/4 platform in Harry Potter? Right in the middle of a busy and boring London platform, there is the entry into that magical, amazing world. You see how? Look at the two portals that I've tried to. Sorry, I'll go back to the last thing. Show Harry Potter is about to board the Hogwarts Express, and here we have Alice going through the mirror. The portal is very important. The portal is, as I said, is that boundary between the magical and maybe the non-magical. There's a very nice word used in Harry Potter, muggles. What does the word muggle mean? The word muggle means non-magical people. This is, of course, a word coined by Rowling herself. It comes from the word mug. The word mug, as we know, in slang means a person who is a moron or who is an idiot. So that is how the genealogy of the word uh, has been done. Wittgenstein would be very happy. I will talk a little bit of Wittgenstein later, of course, in the deliberation. So the portal is very important. The portal is that magical entry in the other world. Other world which has its own rules and regulations, its own principles and own issues. So Alice determines to explore this other world, the world of high fantasy, as soon as she steps inside. She finds a place much like, yet much different from her home. She encounters a smiling clock, animated chess pieces, and a book with backward text, in which she reads a nonsensical poem called Jabberwocky. Frustrated by this strange poem, he sets off to explore the rest of the house. Jabberwocky deserves a lot more attention, and I'll come to this a little later. Now, determined to see this amazing place before she has to return, she abandons the living room and steps off. After a confusing romp to the garden, I'll go through this very fast, this part. Talking Flowers direct Alice to the Red Queen, who informs Alice that she is a part of a giant chess game. Alice's goal to become a chess queen herself, a queen herself, and the Red Queen instructs her that she must begin in the second square and inevitably reach the white eighth square in order for this aspiration to be realized. He explains also a bit of the backwards nature of life in the Mickey Mouse. The next slide. Alice jumps over the first group, which brings her to her first adventure. She finds herself in a carriage full of animals, and once she passes over the next group, she realizes she's alone with an enlarged gnat in the carriage. There's a picture of Alice with this enlarged. She encounters Doodle D and Tweedledum next, who dance, recite poetry, and bicker. She is thrust into a shop, which turns into a boat and then back into a shop. Look at this transformation. I will talk about this transformation, about this transfiguration, and about change of size, disproportion, proportion at some length at least, as the time permits. A little later, little later. In that shop is an egg which transforms into Humpty Dumpty. You see how this is a slide of Tweedledum and Tweedledee, and then this is this Humpty Dumpty, this egg which transforms into Humpty Dumpty. So soldiers arrive at Humpty Dumpty's wall, and with him she notices the White King, with whom she travels to town to see the lion and the unicorn battle. After sharing some cake with onlookers, she finds herself alone in the forest until she is joined by two knights who fight to determine who will take her prisoner. The victor, the Red Knight, leads her to the brook that is the final barrier to her queenship. Jumping over the final brook in the eighth square, Alice is joined by the red and white queens who frustrate her with impossible quizzing. This impossible word I have put in block letters because I want to talk a little bit about that later. She joins a feast, it's being celebrated in her honor, and suddenly the Red Queen is actually her kitten, and she's back in the living room. Alice is left wondering who had been dreaming during adventures in the Looking Glass world. So this was the I shouldn't be saying a part, but this is actually the first portion of my deliberation in which I try to show you important things in the text, just in case someone is not familiar. So we see that the last part is important, is who has been dreaming during our adventures through Looking Glass. So who have been dreaming, what is real and what is the unreal or something is a big question mark that is. So before going into the issues of real and unreal, I'd like to share a few examples from different exponents of high fantasy to drive my point home. Now, what is high fantasy? I would like to talk about this little bit. High fantasy is that text in which fantasy reigns supreme. It talks about another world. In my research, I've tried to coin a word called the parareal, the parareal world, the world which is parallel to the real world and in which certain important things and interesting things happen, and those are completely different from our parameters of understanding. We must try to focus on those issues, on those themes, and see those principles from their principles. See, from their ground, the ground that they stand on, and not our ground. Once upon a time, Mr. Peters said to a sixth grade class, "These are the most magical words our world has ever known, and the gateway into the greatest stories ever told. They are an immediate calling to anyone who hears them, a calling into a world where everyone is welcome and anything can happen. Mice can become men, maids can become princesses, and they can teach valuable lessons in the process." I've taken this extract from Land of Stories, Book 1, Wishing Spell, by Chris Colfer, the famous actor. Now, what he has done in this series is a very interesting series which you can look up. He has tried to retell the stories, the fairy tales, how they end, and they live happily ever after. He tried to catch these characters or reformulate or reframe these characters from where we have known them since this happily ever after framework. So a whole lot of characters are there. The reason why I wanted to use this extract is to say that about this world that he is talking about, that according into a world where everyone is welcome and anything can happen. Mice can become men, maids can become princesses, and so anything can happen. The load of surprises are waiting to happen. And these surprises are what we need to focus on, what we need to see. Very interesting. I've also shared the of the book, which you can see a pic of the book, The Land of Stories. Words are, in my not so humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both influencing injury and remedying it. This other extract from Harry, with his or her narration, with the words, try to bring about this fantasy. Another very important practitioner of fantasy these days is Rick Riordan. You know how teachers tell you the magic word is please? That's not true. The magic word is puke. It will get you out of the class than anything else. I mean, very funnily said, of course, very said in a very light mood. But then he has a point here that what is the magic word? Of course, we'll be seeing many such magical words and such things in this. I would point out two or three definitions of fantasy and try to show how these are very erroneous and consequential or inadequate. First, Ian Foster. Ian Foster encapsulates the ambiguity about fantasy and fantastic representations by referring to another place that they always presumably evoke in the narrative. Foster's metaphor of another place makes the issue more complicated, but it does harp upon a few very pertaining issues. It is true, as Foster says, fantasy exists on two planes. First, it creates a world, real world of sorts, intimately connected with time, character, logic. And second, it creates a world which does not exist at all, where another place shoots over. Tolkien calls fantasy the most really pure form of art, and Fry says fantasy transcends the limits both of the naturally possible and morally acceptable. Transcendence is indeed a very vague qualifier, but the term naturally possible is significant. Fantasy is very deliberate manipulation or distortion of realistic signifiers. Now, realistic signifiers, what are these? Well, let's discuss a bit more about these later. The magical world of popular children's literature, in the writings of Lewis Carroll, is constructed by means of a narrative strategy of evoking the sense of the unexpected by a peculiar substitution of conventional, traditional sense of reality, which is rather narrowly or parochially administered to our lives. You see, the sense of reality is at times traditional, and what is real and what is unreal, as I've been trying to say from the very beginning, are very interchangeable. What is real at this moment might not be real maybe half an hour later or 1 year, one or sometime later. This COVID situation or this lockdown situation has actually, I think, taught us a lot of lessons in this context. So this is the important. What is important? The narrator acts as an accomplice of the reader, just as a criminal has his accomplice. The accomplice of the reader is the narrator. He is a part to it. That is to say, projects the natural self as being either notionally inferior or less predictable or serious than the reader whom he addresses. Uh, the narrator engages in a conversation with the reader, and in that process, he tries to understand or relate that something which is like this one. Didn't Alice didn't venture to ask what he paid them with, so I can't tell you. So when Carroll says, "I can't tell you," you see that is you can enter into the conversation with you, the reader. The child will automatically get engaged. The important question is not whether the child can uh, understand whether the child can understand whether it is real or unreal. A boy of class 10 today, of age 10 today, knows the Harry Potter world might not exist in reality, but is still engaged in that particular world. Okay, so next one. Second, he manipulates the child's imagination and the notion of the real by induction of tropes, imagery, and therefore creating an effect of shock, horror, suddenness, mystery, and wonder. For example, soldiers arrive at Humpty Dumpty's wall, and with them she notices the White King, with whom she travels to the town to see the lion and the unicorn battle. So the child's imagination is motivated by some induction of some trope or imagery, in this case, suddenness, where the soldiers, for example, when the soldiers arrive at Humpty Dumpty's wall, and Alice can see the White King, with whom she travels to see the lion and the unicorn battle. There's a, everything is unreal, but at that moment, where Alice is watching it, it is real and most pertinent in that particular. So the narrator creates the magic with words and terms that are entirely unheard of in normal parlance. The world is the other world, one which can call the parallel. The entire narrative is carried forward to the rules of the other world, to typical, even typological substitution with which the characters look at the normal world. So these characters, they look in the normal world with some chagrin or with some other way. I'll discuss that a little later with some slides. So they look, as I was saying, I saw a man today, a hobbit says. So a man is considered to be something very unusual in that particular world. So look at what the queen says, the red queen says. We must mostly have days and nights, 2 or 3 at a time for warmth. So we have is a very important phraseology used here, an important way of expressing things. We mostly have days and nights, 2 or 3 days at a time, nights at a time. That is a very normal paradigm in that particular world, where he's saying that we have this sort of a worm, day and night for worm. Who knows? Who knows? No, Alice is addressed over here. So Alice is a person from the real world in that sense, who has gone to another world where we see they are not considering our world to be real. It's a matter of perception. It's a matter of conception. Manipulation or distortion of associations, reference. For example, as you know, or sense. Talking flowers direct Alice to the Red Queen, who also is a chess piece. Audience is given here. The Red Queen shook her head. You may call it nonsense if you like, she said, but I've heard nonsense compared with which that would be as sensible as a dictionary. So, a dictionary is the last place which you can consider to be unreliable. So he says that what is nonsense? Is it nonsense? It's not nonsense. So sense and nonsense are exchangeable. In that world of Alice, in that world of the Red Queen, in that world where Alice has dropped into, is the real world over there, and our world is unreal. Yeah, that is the thing which I would like to express upon. By the way, all the page numbers are from the edition which I have. This is Lewis Carroll Through the Looking Glass, HarperCollins edition. So all the page numbers that I have mentioned are for that particular book. Thus, the child distorts the adult sense of the real, just as the narrators of this text try to do. They do not represent outer worlds, but reality itself in a distorted manner, which situates the author as an accomplice of the child. Transference of evidence. In a conversation with Alice, Rose says, well, she's same awkward shape as you, but she's redder and her petals are shorter, I think. There are two very important observations. See, the epithet redder and shorter and awkward. These are three very common adjectives used in our languages, but are transferred to another world. Alice is awkward, and there's another flower over there, because the flowers can speak in this world, who is as awkward as shape as Alice, who doesn't match the parameters in that world. Secondly, she's redder, and petals are shorter. So then this particular rules. So petals are important here. She's redder and petals redder and shorter are two comparatives used here, compared with the normal parlance. So what is normal is not normal in this world. What is abnormal is normal. Maybe that is a normal parameter there. So flowers are normally of a particular red shade, but this person is actually more redder, and her petals are more red, sorry, and more short than it normally is. So you see how deftly Carroll deconstructs, I should say, or distorts the normal sense of the real in this very fascinating manner. Okay. Uh, I would like to refer to the theory of aggrandizement and miniaturization with Pitta Prasad Mukhopadhyay, who of course was my PhD guide and now is teaching in a Mexican university, highlights in his thesis related to icons. He writes, iconic art miniaturizes or aggrandizes visual features. It replaces reality with artifice, familiarity with strangers. Look at this place. We have this Alice before this huge dog, which is aggrandized, huge visual features over there. There's a very nice snap which was found on the internet by my son. Look at this. This is such a nice thing to demonstrate this no matter of size. Size can be miniaturized or aggrandized. These are visual features which are very crucial to the understanding of the text and the aspect of fantasy. In fantasy, things are either they're aggrandized or miniaturized. Think of Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver's Travels, we have the land of Lilliputs and Bobbin Banks, where we have a giant world and the world of dwarves. Why the world of dwarves and why the world of giants compared to our parameters? So when we enter those worlds, of course, everything changes and we are taken for granted. In the category of fantasy literature, presently discussing now, we can find the author, the accomplished narrator, who consciously tweaks our imagination by distorting the traditional norms of reality, sense, and standard sizes as they might represent in reality. So, the sense of reality that we know is being tweaked and distorted by the narrator who tries to envisage into an entirely different world altogether, take us into an entirely world altogether. The author of children's fantasy tweaks the real and subverts it with a distorted version of it. Example: she's thrust into a shop, which turns into a boat. So Alice goes to a shop, which actually becomes a boat. So magic is a key aspect in this most fantasy texts, and it is magic which lies at the heart of narratives that are built upon a series of opposites, and then back into a shop. In that shop, we have an egg which transforms into Humpty Dumpty. That is what I was talking about a while ago. You see, things transform themselves. The size changes. Our imagination is tweaked. The idea of real is tweaked and subverted with a distorted version. This version is a reality in another world altogether. We talk of aliens today. We talk of maybe if there is actually an alien world, a world in which life is there, the parameters will be surely different from our world, the world in which we exist. Surely it will be a completely different story altogether. So we have this shop where there's an egg which transforms into Humpty Dumpty. The photo here shows how Alice is riding that boat, which was actually a shop a little while ago. Now we can understand from Piaget's point of view of how a child can relate to something familiar. We can also interpret this from Mukhopadhyay's observation on how art can aggrandize or minimize as requirement demands or depicts it wants. The photo here, the picture here shows Alice's experiences with an enlarged mat. The person on the left is, of course, the great child philosopher, psychologist, sorry, philosopher, of course, uh, Jean Piaget. Our imagination is tweaked, the distorted version of the real. This is parallel world of the best. This is a brilliant word. I must thank my son for actually finding this. You see, this is the mirror which you can see here, which is the word in this story, the difference between our world and the other world. You see, there is the fort on the other side, a castle maybe, and there are some things here. So this portal, the world, we just don't know where we are, where we are placed, which world is real, whether we are real or whether these worlds are real, what is real, what is unreal, we're absolutely unsure about. So this is the parallel world at its best, where the boundaries just vanish and we are completely taken aback. I will now come back to the poem Jabberwocky. Jabberwocky by Lewis is a seven stanza poem that is divided into sets of four lines or quatrains. It is structured by a consistent rhyme scheme that follows A B A B C D C D, changing in sounds as Carroll saw fit. This has been categorized as a part of academic literature known as nonsense writing. The form of writing originated from traditional nursery rhymes and games, but was later evolved by writers such as Edward Lear and later popularized by Lewis Carroll. Look at this quote that I have tried to put here. There's plenty of sense in nonsense sometimes if you wish to look for it. Yes, of course. I mean, I will be talking on Shukumar Rai just a little later. And there's a plenty of sense in nonsense sometimes if you wish to look for it. Sense in nonsense and nonsense in sense. I'm reminded of that very famous adage about King Lear in Shakespeare, who about his famous sanity in insanity and insanity in insanity. Who is sane and who is insane, and what is sense and what is nonsense are really, really very confusing and very interchangeable things. Very interchangeable things. Madness is, of course, our issue altogether. Largely, this kind of writing has a young audience, but today children and adults enjoy the style. Jabberwocky is considered to be the most popular nonsense poem in the English language. Carroll plays with the sound, meaning, and lack of meaning attached to real and nonsense words in Jabberwocky. Some of these words are simply out of place or out of order. They might, in other contexts, make sense. These conclude burble and tum. Others are gibberish, and the only place they are given seen, at least writing, is within Jabberwocky. They do not have a scientific meaning. It's up to the reader to imbue them with sound, or to just appreciate them for the way they sound. The sound of the nonsense works become especially important when they're spoken out loud. Later, after the poem was published, Carroll provided a few of the words with definitions. That is not important, and I will not discuss that also. But these words have a beauty of their own and should be enjoyed for thus that reason. The poem begins with the speaker using strange and unknown words to describe a sense. These are toves, borogroves, and rocks. These things move in the landscape in different ways and make different noises. They are a part of the world that is wholly separate from our own. The terms are dropped in casually as if one is supposed to know these. There are two significant issues that come up here. First, it must be stated that here Carroll has taken many liberties, the first of many liberties, with normal patterns of semantics. He continuously coins words and phrases that tweak the sense of reality. Carroll adopts many such language games in which he exploits the possibilities of language to manipulate a certain sense of reality. Wittgenstein describes language as a game in which words may be used in a multiplicity of ways. For example, to describe things, to ask questions, to report events, to speculate about events, to make requests, to give commands, to form hypotheses, to solve problems, and to perform other acts of communication. The meaning of a word may be defined by how uh, the word can be used as an element of the language. I will not go into detail of this thing, but the rules of a language game may change, and different rules may be applied to different games. In this case, you see, if we go back to the poem, we see that the next line a speaker jumps to the narrative and tells his son, look out for the Jabberwock. It has jaws that can bite and claws that can catch. The son is going hunting for this creature. He is prepared with his vorpal sword, but it takes him a long time to find it. Finally, when he's taking a break, the Jabberwock appears. A fight occurs, the son comes out victorious and takes the creature's head back to the father. When he gets there, the father embraces him and celebrates over his slaughter of Jabberwock. Jabberwocky was translated into with inimitable excellence by Satyajit Ray into Bengali. In this context, the obvious reference to Sukumar Ray comes to the mind, who was a pioneer of the magical nonsense verse in Bengali, as we have realized by now, as we have the line between nonsense and sense at times flawless at some point or the other. I am sort of very tempted to sort of share, to discuss the last poems, the last lines of the poem Abul Tabul, written by Sukumar Ray. He wrote something like this. The last lines are Ghoni elo ghumer ghor, ganer pala sangamo. Now, in this poem, it is very interesting that he wrote this poem barely hours before his death. I was reading an interview of Satyajit Ray a few days back, in which he was mentioning that I am amazed how a person who is lying on his deathbed can make or crack such a joke, both on life and on death, and yet pass such an impressive remark. Really, the other world replaces the real world by a parallel real world, with its own distinct paradigms, ideologies, ground rules, and its own cognitive thought process. Magic reigns supreme, and it becomes the chief narrative device as it carries the narrative forward by means of the substitution of the real for a distorted version of the real. The world is the other world, in which we can call the parallel. The entire narrative is carried forward to the rules of the other world with typical substitution with which the characters look at the normal world. See, what we are looking at normal world is not normal maybe. So the characters, when they are looking at our world, is is abnormal world or the unreal world. Our world then becomes the other world and the parallel world, and not maybe the normal world that we take pride ourselves to be. And as you can see by now, normal, abnormal, and the unreal are really very exchangeable. I would like to finish this presentation with a repartee between Tweedledum, Tweedledee, and Alice, all of whom are bent upon establishing that they are real. I quote, I shouldn't, Alice exclaimed, because I am only a sort of a thing in this dream. What are you? I should like to know. Ditto, said Tweedledum. Ditto, ditto, cried Tweedledee. He shouted this so aloud that Alice couldn't help saying, hush, he will be waking him, I'm afraid, if you make so much noise. Well, it's no use of your talking about waking him, said Tweedledum, when you are only one of the things in his dream. You know very well you are not real. I am real, said Alice, and began to cry. You would make yourself a bit realer by crying, Tweedledee remarked. There's nothing to cry about. If I wasn't real, Alice said, half laughing through her tears. It all seems so ridiculous. I shouldn't be able to cry. You see, this is very interesting, of course. Before I, of course, finish and this deliberation, just one or two more comments. See how Carroll says something very important to this extract. The king, the person here says that Alice is nothing but a figment of imagination of the dream of the White King, or the sleeping king, position for these people, for Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They said, no, you are not at all real. You are completely unreal. How do you think you are real? You are, it's absurd. And he says, no, I am real. You see how someday he said, oh, look, you are not real. Someone tells us, you are not real. How would you feel? You would feel really strange. So that is what Alice says here. Look at the justification what Alice does. I shouldn't be able to cry. If I am not real, I shouldn't be able to cry. So how can a person cry if he is not real or if she is not real? So now, in this presentation, I have tried to balance the real and the unreal, the sense and the nonsense, and try to demonstrate how these are very very intangible things and how they can be exchanged so very easily and deftly by the narrator, and making this other world of fantasy literature, of high fantasy literature, very real in that sense. So this is also very much theoretically presented in every sense of the term. So I thank you very much for your patience, and I would like to end the deliberation here. I would exit.
Uh,
So I would
Thank you so much. Yes, please carry on.
no, no, I think I've finished. This is last slide, so I've finished.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anjan, for making that wonderful presentation. We do feel a little unsettled about what is real and what is not, and the imaginary and the fantastic, which we may daily encounter and we may still don't realize, and which we keep trying to realize. But yes, I also feel that your presentation raised uh, very distinct feelings of what we understand through our readings of Alice in Wonderland at this age. That is not as children. I mean, it is continuously and consistently confusing, unsettling, disorienting, and even frustrating at times to look for meaning in these texts. We do have some time for a few questions. I have listed a few questions that have reached us through this portal. I will just briefly read out one by one for you, and if you could respond to these questions in your own way for just a couple of minutes each. The first one is that is through the looking glass really for children? I
Yes,
think
yes.
you.
I got this question earlier also. We said it earlier. It's a very interesting question, of course. The word "real" itself again raises a few questions. Now, of course, it is really for children. In that sense. But then again, there's a few questions. I mean, what is actually a children's text? These are things which are very confusing. We are now teaching Tintin. We are teaching Through a Looking Glass, which is Harry Potter. As text in the undergraduate levels and other levels. So we are very sort of confused about these things. Yes, it is basically a children's text, of course, basically written for children. This is about us 8 years. I think it's 8 years old when this adventure took place, of course. But there's a lot of recipe, as Ananda said right now, as we now read. Think of a film like Deshi. I think all of us. I mean, when Ananda and I, we were say very. When I was maybe 5 or 6, 7 years old, maybe when we saw this film, and we were amazed, of course, to see the film. I remember having done that, Raja Dore Marathon allegory, repeating that when I came back home from the cinema hall. But then that is now when I see the film now, and when I can see the perspective of seeing the film now, it is amazing actually. The depths of representation, symbols that are there, amazing actually. Yes, so that is the answer to this question.
Uh, Thank you. We do have another one. It has come from Sarojini Shahu. I have found the name. How is fantasy linked to existentialism? This is really more of a serious question that could be a topic for another seminar. But if you could respond to it
Yes,
in a
yes, you
few
see,
words.
now look, I mean, questions can be there, but as far as this question is concerned, you see, existentialism is a completely different political, social, and a very, I won't say time sort of a phenomenon. But yes, everything actually can be linked to existentialism. But in that sense, there are some aspects of children's literature, like say when we are talking about whether a thing exists or not, in that sense, yes. But I think this question is to me little. I mean, the a little far fetched. Existentialism in the term which Sartre and Kierkegaard talked about is a very and Camus and others talked about. It talks about very typical political and social. So I mean, that doesn't have to do essentially with reality and ambiguity. So I mean, I would rather not. Do.
Okay. And the other question that was there was the distance and difference between the real and
Yes,
the
yes,
unreal.
yes.
I think
I got
you
it.
have already touched on it, but if you could add
Yes,
anything to this.
yes, of
Yes.
course. It's a very nice question, of course. Yes, that is exactly the basic thrust of my presentation. You see, the realism and dream and reality. reality and unreal. They are at times they jumble up, they coalesce, they fuse, and they have this interface, as Principal Sir said, and they all sort of take a peculiar world of their own. So yes, they are very important, and they have to be seen as contrasts. So whether Alice was having a dream, whether there was this portal through which she entered the world of their own, are best unanswered. You see, most questions, it's a gaps and fissures, as Fish said, are most important and most interesting in a text. So even in this text, Alice herself doesn't know who was dreaming, what is a dream, what was it. There's a very important place here, which I have made a note over here. You see, she was told by Doodle D, you're nothing but a figment of imagination in your dreams, in the dream of the sleeping king. So Alice is nothing but a figment of a dream to those people. So you understand how the questions of reality, of distance, of proximity, they all coalesce. That's the observation.
Okay. Thank you again, Anjan. As we see that there are so many comments of appreciation that are coming up on the chat box, and these are in themselves, they show that that you have reached out to a very wide spectrum of audience and in a very effective manner. May I now ask our head of the department, Dr. Roshmita Boral, to say something and to conclude this business session with her vote of thanks.
I am actually quite scared of sounding unreal. I don't know why but I'm actually afraid to
Rashmita,
say.
hello.
But I'm
Rashmita, I
very,
think
very
There's a lot of echo.
so, hello. Rashmita, I think you switch off your mobile phone.
I think it matches
Yes.
very much with the topic that we are discussing today. This echoing and this surreal experience.
I even found Professor Shumon Chaudhary, ex-professor from our department, actually making comments about sounds coming up from Alice's world. I would love to live in Alice's world. Only that, and actually we are living in Alice's world because it's kind of dystopia. An unreal world a few months back we wouldn't have thought possible. I have switched off my mobile and everything else that connected me to reality, and I'm trying to assert my presence on the virtual plane, and I feel very, very alien here. Very alien with all the sounds. But thank you so much. Like I said, I'm very afraid to speak. I'm echoing so much. And really, a lot of gratitude from our department to all the audience whom we have been able to reach out from this online platform, which otherwise, offline we couldn't have. So those are the merits of the sub-real or the semi-real, whatever you may call it. And I think we have also found a portal, like we were talking of that very important portal from 3.25 platform, which led into Hogwarts. So COVID has given us that portal, and with all the negativity surrounding us, I hope we can, take some positive, we can perceive all this around us in some positive, wonderstruck manner. And we can all turn into Alice. We can all, look at the dystopia around us and, find things to wonder about. And reaching that childhood within us, find that child within us again. So I wouldn't like to, cause much more strain to people's ears. So thank you again, Dr. Dash Gupta and our principal sir for encouraging us so much, and to Sondipon who has provided technical support and care for all the participants, and Ananda Gupta, of course, for giving such a wonderful seminar. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, sir. Would you like to comment
Yeah.
or make a final comment?
Is already at the end, at the flag end. Actually, program has been enriched by some real and unreal sound. Anyway, Thank you, Professor Dasgupta, for fantastic presentation. And thank you, the whole department, including Hero department, Usmita, Anandaru, and others for making it a success. And that is the end of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.